But let's get into Psalm 22 specifically, because I can see your picture there behind you, which, as you say, was done with this Sumi ink, which is something I love as well, but don't have any of the tradition of using, but have tried to occasionally. But I can see that it's almost as if you've let the crosses sort of bleed down
In this case, I was drawn to how the ink will bleed into the fabric, and I felt the psalm that begins with a cry really is something that the sound of it, and I'm always interested in the sound of it more than, let's say, a particularized shape of whatever that may be that I'm interested in. What does it sound like? And so in my sense, I wanted to kind of bleed out, so I dampened the canvas. It's not sized, so it's raw. And so when I painted initially with a brush, it became this very broad strokes that you see up and down. And then I really wanted to get to the heart of the image, which is very much about injury and pain and suffering. And so I started this was the first time I did this, because you don't use calligraphy stick like this. You don't, it's meant to be, rubbed against a stone to create an ink rather than directly applied. But I was making an ink, and I felt the psalm called for something more direct. So I started to etch, in a way, into the surface. And those are the lines, vertical lines, and then it was at the end that I started to shape these crosses as kind of a mark of wounding, and really the promise of how Christ walked into the psalm literally, and how we know that. And by the way, Ellen suggested that I do Psalm 22 and Psalm 23 together, going back to what you said, Malcolm. And so I had concurrently, as I was working on this, began Psalm 23, which is very much a monochromatic white painting. Almost looks like a sheep's, coat or sheep's skin. And so very different. But as they connect, as they connect, they create this fantastic image of this vastness of God's plan.
I mean, it is the extraordinary thing about this psalm, isn't it, Malcolm, that it actually, it takes us directly to the cross.
It does, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was conscious of, it was a sort of conscious choice from the beginning when I began my whole Psalter project, was that I was doing it as a kind of, obviously I can understand and respect the original context of the Psalms in the life of David and in the Second Temple and so on, and the scholarship of people like Helen. It's very important to me. Yeah. But I was reading this as in an unashamedly Christian frame, yes, that these Psalms were on the lips of Christ, yes, and that the New Testament shows Christ himself expounding the Psalms as part of showing who he is, and quoting the Messianic Psalms. They are among the texts Luke tells us that he opened their hearts to see, mm-hmm, him in. And in a sense, the question of how does that work came to me precisely in meditating on Psalm 22. Mm-hmm. And there's a line in the poem about this psalm where I say, Christ himself is crying through this psalm. Yes. Which I meant both that it was on his lips when he was on the cross, but that whenever we read it, we're taken into his interior experience of woundedness and hurt. But at the same time, he's taken into our inner experience of woundedness and hurt. So that when we cry out this psalm ourselves in the midst of whichever dereliction it is that we're going through, and whichever sense of abandonedness it is that causes us to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? At the heart of the voice of pain that cries out in us is Christ not only in his, but in our pain, as it were, and that he kind of carries us through. So that was very important to me. But I'm very interested that you worked on 23 as well, because the other thing that was sustaining me, in a sense, through the journey towards this final line and then landing place in Springbrook was my simultaneous reading of 23. And of course, when you read 23 in light of 22, then the line in 23, which suddenly becomes completely illuminated, is the line, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And that sense that I can trust the shepherd to guide me through my own sorrows and death, because he actually has pioneered the path. Do you know what I mean? He can kind of look over his shoulder and say, don't worry, I've been this way before. You know, I know the way through. Yeah. And that's so the link between the two. I'm fascinated. I'm delighted that Ellen told you that to do that. I mean, she's also a friend and a scholar and teacher whom I greatly revere.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I mean, the extraordinary thing about Psalm 22 is it's almost, I mean, I did actually 6 illustrations for Psalm 22 because it's such a rich psalm, and I mean, rich and I mean, it's sort of searing, but it kind of suddenly changes halfway through when it actually comes to that line, you have answered me. And then the whole of the second part of the psalm is almost, I mean, it's almost like Good Friday and Resurrection and Easter Day, because it sort of takes you from literally Good Friday to all the families of the nations will bow down before you, for the kingdom of the Lord rules the nations. And it kind of, I mean, I went from a crucifixion image to the image of Revelation, of the Lamb in the throne room looking as if it had been slain, but actually everyone bowing down before him, because it's kind of, I mean, when I think Peter says, you know, David wrote as a prophet, you think there's really no other way to, for me at any rate, to approach this psalm, that it is actually, as you say, sort of Jesus speaking, and that means the Jesus of the whole Gospels and of Revelation as well.
Well, it's there in the book of Revelation, isn't it? In that extraordinarily powerful poetic paradox, where he says, and the Lamb upon the throne shall be their shepherd.
Yes.
I mean, to move from the one who is both the Lamb and the shepherd, the Lamb that was slain and the shepherd. And it always seems to me that that's a very telling thing, that, you know, the only shepherd you can really trust is the one who knows what it's like to be a lamb. You know, we suffer at the moment from shepherds who don't understand their flocks at all.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the questions that I asked Ellen was whether when Jesus cried out on the cross, would the listeners, many of them Jewish authorities, have connected the dots, you know, like he was beginning the psalm.
Yes.
In a way, right? That turns into praise of God. He doesn't get to finish the psalm, but it was as if it was a gift given to the listeners to say, no, this psalm has a different ending than just this cry. And then Psalm 23 makes more sense that way, because it is literally as if, you know, revisiting, especially from the perspective of Jerusalem, you look across and you look down to where the garden, literally the valley of death, where the cemeteries are and so forth. And so this mind map, or, you know, that you have in journeying through, and when Christ uttered those cries, you know, did the listeners know, or was it later that they remembered? I don't know, but it was.
What did Ellen say?
Yeah, she said, you know, the connectedness of the Psalms, you know, we can't be absolutely sure that they would have been paired together, because the connection was could have been made much earlier, much later. We don't know, but certainly the psalm itself would have been known. You know, it's a well-known psalm, even at the time. So most likely Jesus intended for us to complete the psalm, and to think about the coronation, think about the feast to come.
Look, I think we could go on talking about this for such a long time because there's really so much to say about it. But I think probably we ought to hear Malcolm's poem and actually to look more closely at Mako's picture. So what I'd like to do, well, first of all, before we do that, let me just say that we'll hopefully go on with these conversations after Easter. And hearing about Mako's pictures, I'd love to sort of come back and talk with him about some of the pictures as well. But meanwhile, just to wish everyone a happy Easter who's watching this, and so perhaps we can hear the Malcolm's poem and see Mako's picture, and then you'll hear the final bit of the Psalm 22, which actually ends, the final line of the Psalm 22 says, "He has done it," which is just, again, is like the Tetelestai in the Gospels, and so I've actually illustrated it with the veil of the temple being torn in two. So anyway, let's hear
Here is my response to Psalm 22. Deus, Deus meus. Before he shares with us the golden crown, he comes to share with us the crown of thorns. Our hurts and hates close in and hem him round, mock and humiliate him. All the scorns with which we blaspheme God in one another are concentrated here. Among the horns of unicorns, the lions' mouths, the slather of our devouring wickedness. He takes it all and turns it into love. He gathers all of us and by atonement makes our peace with God. He speaks to us of mercy even as we pierce him. No one slakes his thirst. I tremble at the mystery, for Christ himself is crying through this psalm to suffer my own dereliction for me.
I will make your name known to my brothers in the middle of the congregation. I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. Let all the seed of Jacob honor him, and all the seed of Israel stand in awe before him. For he does not despise, he does not disdain the suffering of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from him. He cried to him, and he heard. My praising in the great assembly comes from you. I will fulfill my promises before those who fear him. Let the poor eat and be satisfied. Let those who seek him praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and return to the Lord, and all the families of nations will bow down before you. For the kingdom is the Lord's. He rules the nations. All the fat ones of the earth eat and bow down. Before him will bow down all who go down to the dust, each one who cannot preserve his own life. A seed will serve him. The Lord will be made known to a generation that will come. His deliverance will be made known to a people that will be born. He has done it.